Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. And today I would like to teach you on how to achieve the perfect work-life balance. Alright, let's get started. I want you to picture yourself a circle. This circle represents the 24 hours of each day. And what I want you to do is divide the circle into 3 sections. Part 1, there's the 8 hours of sleep. Part 2, there is the 8 hours of work. And part 3 is the remaining 8 hours. What you need to know is that this 8 hours defines who you are as a person. It defines what you do and what you value. For example, if you're a family man, do you spend time with your family during this 8 hours? If you value friendship, do you spend time with family or with your friends? If you value your health, do you go to the gym during this time? Do you like to read, etc.? And if you're like me, a serial entrepreneur, then you might be working, right? You want to make a lot more money. However, what you need to know is that if any of these 3 sections goes out of balance, you will become unhappy. How does this work? For example, if you don't get enough sleep, then you can't function and everything collapses. If you don't go to work, then you can't fund everything, you don't have a place to stay, nothing to eat, then everything crumbles. And if you have a good amount of sleep but you work too much and you don't do the activities that you value, then what's the point of life, right? You just work but you don't do anything that you enjoy. So if any of these 3 things goes out of balance, you'll become unhappy. And the most common mistake people make is that in order to make more money, they increase the amount of hours they work each day. So what happens is they extend the 8 hours either into their sleep or into their value time, right? In order to make money. This can be good on a short term, but however, in long term, this is unsustainable and everything will eventually collapse. So in order to solve this, you need to ask yourself one question. During this 8 hours of work, or however many hours you work, how much of this time do you actually spend on doing productive things? And what I mean by productive things is, what things are you doing that actually generates you money? For example, if you spend 2 hours a day replying to emails and these emails generate no money for you, then what are you doing? Like, it makes no sense to do these emails, right? Just because you are busy doing things doesn't mean you're productive. In reality, maybe being too busy is the same thing as being unproductive, right? Because you're finding tasks to do that you shouldn't be doing. So basically you're procrastinating. So how do you solve this? I like to take an example from artists. Artists, in order to increase the amount they charge for their work, they need to become more recognizable. They need to build their brand, right? So the more famous they are, the higher they can charge. So in order to do this, what they do is they want to increase their exposure on social media, in particular Instagram. And if you know the Instagram algorithm, you realize that in order to gain followers, there are 2 things you need to do. You need to provide really good content, and the second one is you need to be very, very active and very, very consistent. So on average, you will probably need to post maybe once a day. So in order to increase their followers, they will need to make a lot of work for their Instagram. However, most artists fail because they already have their normal work that they need to do in order to survive, and they need to add on top of it creating content for Instagram every single day. And they fail in 2 areas. One is that they spend way too much time on each work, or 2, they believe that their work is not good enough, right? So they don't want to post something that they don't feel that it's good enough, right? So if they don't solve these 2 problems, then they will never succeed, because eventually they will stop posting and give up, right? This happens to YouTube as well. Some people post and what they figure out is that it takes way too much time to edit, etc. In order to overcome this problem, so what someone came up with is the 30-day challenge. So what the 30-day challenge is that they challenge themselves to do a post every single day, regardless of how good the piece is. And on top of that, they limit the amount of time they spend on each content. For example, some people may limit their tools to just 1 tool, such as maybe using a pencil to sketch the whole thing. And they also limit themselves to maybe 30 minutes each day, right? because you don't want to spend way too much time or else you will or else the balance will fail. So what happens is that with a limited amount of tool and a limited amount of time, you realize is that you have to become much more creative in order to produce good work, right? And also, you'll become much more productive because you realize I only have 30 minutes, I want to use the most of it, right? So this can be applied to your normal work as well. How? Imagine you're 8 hours and you only work maybe 1 or 2 hour maximum. That's very productive. And the rest of the time, I don't know what you're doing because I can't work 8 hours straight of full productivity. It's way too tiring, right? Because even if I do, I probably can't do that every single day. So what you want to do is find the activities that generates you the most money and you need to do them. For example, if these activities takes up 2 hours of each day, what you want to do is maybe extend that 2 hours to 4, right? But instead of spending 8 hours of day at work, maybe you can decrease the amount of 8 hours to just 4 hours. However, you spend that 4 hours doing productive work, so wasting your time. And what you realize is that if you limit yourself with time, you have to become much more creative with making money. Some people realize that they have to charge more or they need to increase their skills in order to become more efficient. For example, maybe they spend 4 hours doing pure work for clients and then they spend the other 4 researching or practicing on how to get better. So in order to achieve a work-life balance is instead of spending more time working more hours to make more money, what you need to do is to use the same amount of time or maybe less to be more creative and to learn more skills to make more money within the same amount of time. Alright guys, and that's it for today's video. There will be a part 2 to this video because I can't fit everything in one video or else it get too lengthy. Comment below what you think about it. Remember to subscribe and I will see you next time.